All right, good morning, and thank you for joining us for the second webinar in our tree board webinar series. Today we've got Paul Ries going to talk about understanding the political process and where the tree board fits in. Paul Ries has over 25 years experience in urban forestry at the local, state, national, international, nonprofit, and academic levels. He currently teaches urban forestry and arboriculture courses at Oregon State University as an instructor and is also an extension specialist in the OSU College of Forestry. He also manages the State Urban and Community Forestry Program for the Oregon Department of Forestry. He serves as a lead incident public information officer for wildfires and all risk incidents and is a member of the board of directors for the International Society of Arboriculture, which is a nonprofit professional society with 20,000 members worldwide. He holds a master's degree from the Ohio State University and is an ISA certified arborist. With that, Paul, you're ready to go.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning, everyone. As introduced, this particular topic is about understanding the political process and where you and your tree board fit in. And you should see on your screen there a slide that sort of has an overview and a photo of me there because you can't see me, you can just hear me. Basically, three things I want to cover today. I'm going to use a term called tree politics, and we'll talk about what that really means. We'll talk about how tree boards engage in the political process, and then really 7 tips or strategies for tree boards to effectively do this. Much of the material in this presentation is developed from Tree Board University, which is an online training course for tree boards. If you go to treeboardu.org, you can find more information about this. There's also a handout available for this talk that accompanies it and has an outline that has a few of these points and also the 7 tips listed out. So, what do we mean by the term tree politics? This is a term that I coined about 25 years ago or so to talk about the relationship that people have with trees. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's environmental, ecological, social, and sometimes it's even political. So, tree politics. Trees we know what trees are, but how do we define politics? Well, if you were to look up a dictionary definition, here's a couple of options on the screen that you might come up with. The art or science of governing, the affairs engaged by a government, the internal conflicting interrelationships among people. Boy, that's a good one. So basically, politics is the process that you can observe in all human group interactions. So you can have the political process. We're not talking necessarily about Republicans and Democrats here. We're not talking about always necessarily governance, but we're talking about this process by which groups make decisions, and it includes activism on behalf of specific issues or causes. Now, politics has a negative connotation in our society, quite frankly. If you look at the popularity levels of Congress and the president, they're historically low on both counts at the present time. But that's not really what we're talking about here. I'm not talking about politics from a negative standpoint, at least I hope I'm not. Politics is a process. It's an inevitable one. You've probably heard of office politics or whatever. There's different types of politics. But politics has something to do with trees as well. The reason that tree politics are a part of urban forestry is because politics involves people, and so does urban forestry. And where people are involved, politics are involved. So urban forestry is really concerned with managing the relationship that people have with trees. Now, that might be a little different perspective than you've heard before. We often think of urban forestry as the process of managing trees in the city, and it is. But because urban forestry deals with the 2 most complex organisms on Earth, trees and people, urban forestry really is about managing that relationship between trees and people. So why are politics important? Well, politics basically assure linkages to people's needs. It's through the political process that we vote, that we advocate, that we budget, that we support, that we make laws and ordinances. So these are things in the public sector that help us manage the day-to-day affairs of living in a city. In urban forestry, we want to really think about how do we gain understanding, support, and acceptance for what it is that we want to promote, in our case, trees. That involves politics. Politics are also important because politics is how we generate money by voters or community leaders or citizens. So that aspect of tree politics, it's really looking at anywhere in the public sector in which we engage as tree board members or as staffs of urban forestry programs. How do we garner funding and support? So what's involved with tree politics? Well, I think we have to talk about some underlying assumptions here. And the first of all is that most people take trees for granted. They don't necessarily recognize that our urban and community forests are a valuable asset that need to be managed, that need proper care, and that really need an investment. So one of the roles of a tree board member and a tree board as a group is really to convince decision makers, elected officials, and citizens of the value and importance of the urban forest. Now, you might think, well, my tree board is responsible for planting trees or for hearing appeals or for having developing an urban forest management plan. Great, those are all true. But I also would argue that one of the fundamental roles of a tree board is this advocacy or this education or this information type role. Another way to look at it is you're the Lorax. Your tree board, you're the people that speak for the trees in your communities. Thus, tree boards really must engage in tree politics if they want to be successful. So what are the goals of tree politics? Well, as I mentioned, it's about obtaining an investment in urban forestry from local decision makers and marketing and communicating the urban forest to people who can influence it and to impact it. So look at it this way. You need money. You need support. You need political support. You need to gain funds and supporters for your tree board. So here are some tools that your tree board should be involved with at some level, and they are lobbying, advocacy, and education. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. We'll start with lobbying. Now, lobbying, again, is one of those things that has a bit of a negative connotation to it. It might conjure up smoke-filled rooms and cash being passed under the table. No, we're not talking about that here. What we're talking about lobbying is the practice of actively attempting to influence decisions of policymakers to your advantage, in your case, your tree board's advantage. Now, we understand there may be limitations on your ability to lobby. If you work in the public sector, that's certainly the case. But if your tree board has some role in lobbying or promoting the trees in your community. But you can also lobby through other people. So I have a tree board in my state in Oregon who they actually have a lobbyist on their tree board. This is a guy whose job it is to lobby. He lobbies for something completely outside of trees generally, but he likes trees, and so he happens to be the citizen member on the tree board. But he has those lobbying skills, and he can advocate for others. That's really what a lobbyist does. The second one is advocacy. Now, advocacy is a little bit like lobbying, but it's more designed for inspiring other people to act. In fact, that's really advocacy. The act of pleading for, or supporting, or recommending a cause or action. But it's also something that you have a minimal or no conflict of interest on behalf of a cause. So let's take a look at this billboard here that you see on your screen. It says, "Milwaukee's trees help us breathe easier," from the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Think about it. And it's got a picture of a young girl with an inhaler, talking about the connection between trees providing clean air and reducing asthma. So this is an advocacy type of a billboard. The city of Milwaukee is advocating for tree planting. They're advocating for clean air. They're advocating for a better human health conditions. So what are they telling people to do? Absolutely nothing. They're just trying to advocate on behalf of the cause of trees and clean air. But they're hoping that you, as seeing this billboard, if you were driving down the road in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, would see this billboard and think, trees may help us breathe better. So maybe I should think about that. Maybe I should plant a tree. In other words, advocacy is really inspiring somebody else to do something rather than you necessarily doing it yourself. And then finally, and really most importantly, the third element here is education. people, including the elected officials who have a lot of things that are competing for their attention, they may not notice or care about trees unless someone there is there to tell them, and that's really your role as a tree board member. The message, I think, has to be that our trees are important, that they must be cared for, and it's really communications and public relations tools that help us get those things across. So one of your main roles then is really educating people about why trees are important, and there's a lot of different tools that we can use to match our audience to try to do that. So when we think about how do we engage in tree politics, well, we do it through lobbying, through advocacy, and through education. Now let's move into those 7 tips or strategies that people could use, or that your tree board could use, to help figure out how to engage in this political process. The first one that I would recommend is really to live your mission. Now, somewhere, probably in the dusty books or the digital dust of your city website, you'll find a charter, a why your tree board exists. It's probably established in an ordinance, and it might say that your role is to advise the city, or to decide where to plant trees, or to hear appeals from people that want to take trees down, whatever it happens to be. So the idea here is that you have a role, you have authority, you have constraints, you have opportunities, and you need to know what those are, because it's a matter of trying to figure out how do you live your mission, how do you stay within that mission, and how do you actually fulfill what it is that your board is all about. And the ability to do that really gives you credibility, and a lot of times, tree boards can get beyond their mission. They can get controversial. They can get engaged in things that, they may be important, or maybe they may be interested in, but they may be a bit peripheral to what the tree board is all about. So it's important to really live your mission, know what your job is as a tree board member, and fulfill that role. That's your best strategy for engaging in the political process. Number 2 is understand the circles of influence and circles of concern. This graphic is credited to author Stephen Covey. You've probably heard of him. He wrote a seminal book about 25 years ago called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you haven't read it, great book. Would encourage you to read it. Covey talks about that we all have a circle of influence and a circle of concern. For most of us, it's the left side of the screen there, the actual our circle of influence is pretty small. We might be concerned about world peace, but there's really not a lot we could do about it. We might be concerned about bigger pictures of things, but our influence over that is really not that great. What we really want to do is we want to move to the right side of the screen. We want to enlarge our circle of influence. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be concerned about more things. It just means we want to have more influence over things we're concerned about. So if you can understand this graphic from your tree board's perspective, ask yourselves what it is that our tree board is about. What are we concerned about, and how do we make positive impact or positive change in that area? In other words, what we want to do is we want to put our energies into what we can actually influence rather than just what we're concerned about. So if you're going to engage in the political process, you've got limited time and limited money and limited ability. You want to think about this circle of influence. Number 3, pay attention to the role of political capital. Now, again, political capital, what is it? It may not be a term you're familiar with. Political capital is an imaginary currency, if you will, that can make or break your tree board's success. Political capital is often referred to as something the politician has, but in reality, groups have it as well. It's the personal resources available to you to use your influence in the decision-making process. It's your image, your goodwill. It's based on your reputation and your integrity. It's what people think about you. That's your political capital. Again, as I said, it's kind of imaginary. But the idea here is that political capital is the goodwill that you or your tree board has developed for doing great things like planting trees and making your city more livable. So how do you pay attention to political capital? Well, you earn it whenever you can, and you spend it very wisely. How do you earn political capital? Well, you have to understand the political system. You need to understand how your government works. Understand what are the right channels to raise an issue through, for example. In other words, be politically savvy. You also earn political capital by creating relationships, by being the person or the organization, being the go-to person or the go-to organization that can weigh in with thoughtful and respectful input. It's important that you be patient and respectful when you're dealing in the political process, but you want to be the problem solver. You want to give solutions. You know, my friend George Gonzalez is the city forester for Los Angeles, California. Yes, LA does have a city forester. George will tell you that he doesn't plant trees. Now, that sounds interesting, right? He plants atmospheric improvement devices. That's his name for trees, atmospheric improvement devices. Because smog is a big issue in LA. Clean air is a big issue. He's trying to help people understand that planting trees solves the problem, helps solve the problem of air pollution and smog. So he's giving a solution. He's being a problem solver. You earn political capital also by perspective, by knowing where the other people stand on an issue, and sometimes that's walking a tightrope of trying to be neutral when it's time to be neutral. You gain political capital by virtue of achieving success and helping others achieve successes as well. It's also important to spend political capital wisely. You need to save political capital for when you really need it, but realize that it must be spent to be useful. If your tree board's done great things, but it's been a while since you've done great things, and the people who all were impressed by all the great things you did are now out of office or moved to another city, you may find you've got a loss in the political capital column because you didn't spend it when you had it, and now it's no longer available to you. It also can be wasted by failed attempts at promoting an unpopular agenda or engaging in controversies unnecessarily. Understand that it also can disappear if you're seen to be playing politics, if you're seen to be less than genuine. That's the idea behind political capital. Number 4, communicate effectively. The tree board needs to communicate as a whole. It's very detrimental to the tree board effectiveness to have tree board members communicating different things. You need to speak as one board. But understand that your tree board success isn't just measured by how many trees you plant, but really by your ability to communicate the importance of trees. You do that by navigating a communications triangle, as you see on the screen here. That communications triangle has to do with finding what is the key message that you want to get across. What is the target audience that needs to hear that message, and what's the proper tool to reach that audience? Your ability to navigate this triangle is really important because different key messages are going to resonate with different target audiences, and different tools are going to be used in some instances and not in others. And when I say tools, it might be a newsletter, it might be a press release, it might be a website, it might be a brochure, it might be an event of some sort. There's lots of tools you can use to communicate trees. You also should have an elevator speech. An elevator speech is a brief description of what it is you do and why, and it's called an elevator speech because it's designed to be something you could tell somebody if you got on an elevator with someone and you press the button to go to whatever floor you're going to, and the person says, so what do you do and what are you're interested in? You want to be able to tell them that elevator speech in a concise and clear manner in enough brief time before they get off the elevator. So that's why it's called an elevator speech. Be good for you to have an elevator speech if you don't already have one, but that's an effective tool to communicate trees and a great way to engage in the political process. And number 5, always build your organizational capacity. What we're talking about here is that the things that you do in your tree board, you need to continue to build your ability to do those things. So you may plant trees or you might hold events, but how do you do that? Well, you have to plan. You have to build relationships. Maybe you have an annual retreat that helps you focus on sort of the long term rather than the just meeting-to-meeting issues that your board is doing. Pay attention to what your tree board is capable of. It's capable of probably more than you can imagine, but it's only capable of those things through those important opportunities and activities that build your capacity to do things. There's an article that I've provided here to accompany this presentation today called An Urban Forestry SWAT Team. It was written by Don Willicke, who used to be on the Shade Tree Advisory Committee for the state of Minnesota. Don is a lawyer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And Don wrote this article about that every urban forestry program needs a special weapons and tactics team, a SWAT team, of people who are willing to go to bat for the program. That might be a journalist or a wealthy person in the city or someone who's related to the mayor or whoever it happens to be. But it's somebody, a group of people rather, who are willing to go to bat, maybe when the budget for trees in your town's being cut, whatever. I encourage you to read that article because it's got some great insights on building your organizational capacity. I also want to share with you a diagram from a friend of mine, Mark Smiley, who runs an organizational development company in Portland, Oregon. Mark came up with this diagram that you see here about how do you build an organization. So there's your tree board right in the center of that, and your tree board is probably, legislatively or, city council established, and it's got 5 or 7 members, however many. Your tree board's right in the center there. You might also have committees on outside your tree board, so people who are on your tree board or not on your tree board or used to be on your tree board that kind of help you do your activities. You probably outside of that have advisors, people who you go to who aren't on your tree board, but people you go to for advice on different issues. And then outside of advisors, you have supporters, people who, they support what it is you do. They like the fact that you're engaged in improving the livability of your community. And then finally, outside of that, you have just people who know you. They know, yeah, our town's got a tree board. So every organization has these different layers. The idea here is that where do people come from that join your board? Well, oftentimes your board, people get appointed by the mayor or whomever, the city council. And so, they may come from, wherever. They might be, related to someone or know someone, or they may just be interested in your particular subject. But ideally, what you want to have on your board is you want to move people from your committee to your board or from your advisories committee. So when people that come onto your board, you want people who are already supporters, already advisors, already engaged in your process. Similarly, when somebody goes off the board, when their term expires, you want to keep them engaged in some manner. Put them on a committee, make them serve an advisory role, or just make sure they continue to be supporters of that. So people sort of move in and out of these circles as time goes by, benefiting your organization. And number six, make yourself, or in this case your cause, relevant. Why should people care about what it is you do on your tree board? Tree boards need to focus on the benefits, the environmental, the economic, and social benefits that trees provide and that the activities that tree boards conduct. You want to promote tree planting as a tool to address other community issues rather than just as an end to itself. You have to help people make the connections. That's part of the political process, making trees relevant. There's a lot of research out there that can help you. So, your downtown business district needs trees. Go to Dr. Kathy Wolf's website at the University of Washington. Pull up some of her data on the fact that people are willing to pay more for trees, for goods purchased in business districts with trees versus ones that don't have trees. So, be able to help make that connection and help people understand what's in it for them. Number 7, engage in the political process by expanding your boundaries. It's important that you find the right partners to leverage your efforts. Expand your circle of influence. You can do that through working with other groups. For example, every town probably has some sort of a popular festival. That festival might be related to art or history or culture, whatever. Is there a role for trees to play there? Can you have a booth that passes out information about historic trees in your town or about how different cultures use trees, whatever it happens to be? Find partnerships, find areas that expand your boundaries and influence in urban forestry. The second part of that is, you can expand your circle of influence to the state level and to the national level as well. At the state level, every state has a state urban forestry council. There are professional societies such as International Society of Arboriculture. They have local chapters. There's boards, commissions, even your state legislature. Find ways to partner excuse me, partner with other entities that have in common. Maybe there's other tree boards that are interested in the same things that your tree board is interested in. Seek those out. Find ways to expand your influence beyond just your city limits. And even at the national level, there's a whole national urban forestry movement. There's a bunch of organizations. I won't read those off here. You can see them on the screen. But there's a lot of organizations that are interested in urban forestry. And you're part of this greater urban forestry movement, whether you know it or not. And your tree board has a role to play in advocating, even at the national level, for an increased investment or increased exposure or increased understanding of the importance of trees. So to kind of summarize this, I think that it's very important that people who serve on tree boards and tree boards collectively understand the political process and understand where they fit into that process, and really that you can make a real difference in your community by engaging that. One of those areas I think that you need to think about for why you engage in the political arena on behalf of your tree board is really that we want to leave a healthier urban forest behind for the next generation. I think every tree board should have some initiative that helps connect young people with trees. It's vitally important that we help leave behind a healthier urban forest for the next generation, and that's a great way to do that. Well, as mentioned in the introduction, I work for both the Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon State University. At Oregon State, I actually teach online courses in urban forestry, so if you have an interest in learning more about different urban forestry aspects, you could do that from the comfort of your own computer. I offer some college-level courses in urban forestry and arboriculture if it's an area that you're interested in expanding your knowledge base on. So I hope that today's presentation has given you a good look at this whole topic of tree politics and the political process, and understanding how lobbying and advocacy and education play an important role, and then really those 7 tips: live your mission, understand your circle of influence and concern, pay attention to the role of political capital, communicate effectively, always build your organizational capacity, make yourself or your cause relevant, and expand your boundaries. That those 7 tips and strategies will be useful for you and your tree board in helping you navigate the local political waters that you might find yourself in. Because, as I said, you are the Lorax. You have a very vital and important role to play in making your city more livable, and being in the political process is really part of that. So thanks to Leslie and the North Carolina folks for putting this together, and I hope it's been useful to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paul. We do have some questions that have been emailed to me. So I figured I'd just read them out, and you can just take a few minutes to answer each one. First is a question from Michael Davey. We've got, he wants to know, besides some tree plantings, do you have any specific recommendations of community activities that tree boards can do to engage the community, or any success stories?
I think there's a lot of things out there, and you'd be surprised. I know one community that sponsors an Arbor Day 5K run, a fun run every year. I think that's a great thing. Get people outside, get them engaged in the urban forest. They sponsor a race. Now, what does running have to do with urban forestry? Well, on the surface, probably not much, but you could make the argument that people need runners need clean air to breathe, right? Trees produce clean air. There's a connection there. So they do an Arbor Day fun run, and it raises awareness of trees. So I think that's great. I'm familiar with one community that actually did what they sort of mockingly called it a reverse Arbor Day event. They actually took a tree down for Arbor Day. I think they planted one too, but they took one down. They actually had a tree that had to be removed, and so they brought a crew out to remove the tree, and they invited the public, and they put they had an ornamental horticulture professor from the local community college who stood there with a microphone and explained what the arborists were doing and how they were removing this tree and why it had to be removed and so forth. So there's really just a lot of different things that tree boards can engage in that will help them sort of move the ball downfield, as it were, in terms of raising awareness. So I would just think creatively. Think about, as I mentioned, those festivals that every city does. How can you tie trees to your popular city festival? And then finally, I think every tree board should have some role in the city, in schools as well. I mentioned that, whether it's sponsoring maybe it's sponsoring a 4-H club or organizing a tree planting event specifically for kids, whatever it happens to be. You need to have outreach activities as part of your tree board's agenda.
Okay, we've got a second question asking, do you recommend city officials or councilmen people in those kind of positions be placed on the board itself?
Generally the composition of the tree board is actually fixed by city ordinance. So if your city ordinance says there'll be a liaison from the city council, that's going to be in there. Generally, I think city councilors are at least the ones I know, are often very overwhelmed. The job doesn't really pay well. In fact, most of them don't pay at all. It's a volunteer type of position. And they have other lives to live. So their amount of time they can invest in going to meetings and events or things like that is somewhat limited. So rather than sitting city councilors, what I would look for is retired city councils. Find somebody who still wants to serve their community but doesn't have time to serve on city council anymore. Invite them or ask the mayor to appoint them to your tree board.
Okay. Those are all very good ideas, recommendations. We've got another question asking, it says, for those communities currently without a citizen tree board, what steps would you recommend to lobby for one?
Good question. So I think there's a lot of resources out there for the value of tree boards. Some cities are maybe reluctant to start another commission if they have a lot already. Actually, I am in favor of having some board that has tree responsibilities. Even if it's a duty that's added to a Parks Recreation Commission or what have you. So, in my state, I've got one tree board that's called the Civic Beautification and Urban Forestry Committee, or CBUF. It's kind of an interesting title. But they've taken the City Beautification Committee and combined it with trees. So, they were able to do that rather than establish something new. I think that. The interesting thing about urban forestry is it's generally very grassroots oriented. So if you want your city to establish a tree board, it needs to come from the citizens. It needs to be a grassroots effort. It just can't be one person. It needs to be a number of people who think this is a good idea and are willing to move it forward.
Okay, and then we have one final question here. It says, I work in a community where everyone expresses their undying love and devotion for trees, but they scatter like roaches when asked to participate in anything. How would you recommend dealing with those kind of issues?
Sure. Well, Leslie, as you know, we're all very busy people, and finding volunteer time and finding volunteers is not always easy. I think it's important that you make it easy for people to volunteer for your tree board. And what I say that is, have a system set up. Make it easy for them to sign up. Maybe from your website they can sign up to volunteer. Make sure they're rewarded and recognized. Give them a position description. Now that sounds kind of strange. Well, it's just a volunteer. It's not a real job. But that's okay. Give them a little one-paragraph position description of what it is that you need to have done. It's okay to have a volunteer position description, because people have time to give. They don't have time to waste. So if you want volunteers, you need to structure that so it's a good volunteer experience. You want your tree board to be known as the best volunteer opportunity in the city. That's the approach that I would take.
Okay, great. Thank you. That is all we've got for today's webinar. Thank you, Paul, so much for your insight into the fun world of the political realm of being on a tree board. Hopefully everybody got some very useful tips and ideas that they could take back to their tree board. Try and get everything moving in the right direction. I just want to take a couple minutes here at the end. We've got a couple of follow-up links that if everybody could go to afterwards. First is the webinar quiz itself. So this is for individuals that are going to be participating in more than one of the webinars in this series. As part of the webinar series for individuals that attend 3 or more of the webinars, then they are asked to go to this website here to take a short quiz, multiple choice, true false quiz. It's just a way for me to track attendance. And at the end, if you're attending 3 or more, I'm putting together a resource guide that I will send to you. It'll have different references and materials that would be useful for your tree board to move forward and become more active and kind of grow and build your urban forestry efforts. Second is if everybody could take just a couple minutes to go to our evaluation website through SurveyMonkey, just to give us some insight and response back to what you felt content-wise for this webinar, and give us some ideas of what other topics or issues you would like to hear about for tree boards. Also, you can see that we have 3 more webinars in this webinar series here. Our next one is February 4th for community forestry planning. We're going to be talking about urban forest management plans. So that would be a very good one to attend. You just go to our website to register, and I'll send you an email confirmation out. So with that, we are good to go, and I appreciate everybody's time to participate in this webinar, and I look forward to hearing everybody's response.